To preface this story, I love to drive, like hours-long drives to nowhere with no destination in mind. Just me, my music, and the road ahead of me. Living in Nebraska, I'd often take back roads or lonely highways cutting through the countryside to small towns, and eventually cities. And I'd usually take these drives at night, since there was far less traffic to worry about. I've done it since I've gotten my license, and I've never once had any sort of issue, nor have I ever run into any trouble. But that's something that I can't say anymore. For reference, I'm a relatively small 22-year-old female, and as I've stated before, I often take these drives completely and utterly alone. They're a good way to clear my head when I'm stressed, upset, or overwhelmed, or for me to get a plan together to sort personal issues out. I've also done these long and lonely drives to get away from the toxicity of my household when I used to live with my parents, as a means of coping with their alcoholism. Though now that I've moved out and I'm in a much better place mentally, I don't really have the urge to get in my car and just drive anymore. But on the night that this event took place, I was feeling pretty overwhelmed and anxious with a cluster of personal issues that I'd rather not get into. I felt restless and irritable around my boyfriend, couldn't focus on anything else, and decided that I would take a drive to clear my head. My boyfriend was understanding and told me to be careful and to not be gone for too terribly long since it was already pretty late. I agreed, gave him a kiss goodbye, and I left. I drove around our city for about 30 minutes, but I was still feeling on edge about everything transpiring in my personal life, so I decided to drive further north down those familiar, dark, winding one-lane highways. I kept the car at a steady 65 miles per hour, taking the turns at a slower pace in case a deer jumped out around the bend, and was just admiring the vast, empty darkness of the snow-capped fields and barren trees. It was honestly a bit creepy being all alone with no cars in sight, seemingly in the middle of nowhere. The few houses there are, miles back from the road, lightless, and the dead cornfields withered away and covered in snow. It was like something out of a horror movie, and I half expected to see a ghost pop up in my rearview mirror, or see someone clamber out from the patches of trees dotting the horizon. The only light came from my headlights, and even then, I still strained to see through the inky darkness of the night. By now, it was just after midnight, and I told myself that once I made the familiar roundabout that would either take you to a small town or back up towards the city, that I would head back home. That roundabout was still maybe 15-20 minutes away, but other than my imagination picturing the worst, I wasn't really all that concerned. I mean, I was by myself. I didn't have any other motorist to worry about. Right? Wrong. As I'm rounding another bend, I notice a vehicle with its hazards flashing, maybe a quarter of a mile or something away from me. It was some sort of sedan, dark-colored, and was angled to where only part of it was on the shoulder, while the rest jutted out into the road. Like whoever this was had to pull over in a hurry, but didn't quite manage to do that. The driver's side door was flung wide open, and as I slowed my vehicle down and angled it towards the opposite side of the road to pass, I could make out what looked like maybe blood on the inside of the door. I didn't see anyone on the road or in the car, and I was the only motorist in sight. Cell phone reception there is spotty at best, but more often than not, you couldn't get reception no matter how hard you prayed, which was definitely the case when I took a glance at my phone to see if I had any bars. So here I am, a lone female on the road at night, pulling up near a vacant vehicle that looks like someone had been attacked on the inside. All of that with no cell service. Now, I'm no dummy. I've watched countless episodes of Investigation Discovery and Criminal Minds, and I read far too many true crime books to know that this had bad and danger written all over it. But there was still a small part of me that worried something terrible had happened to whoever was in that vehicle, and I thought that I needed to help. These roads don't get a lot of traffic late at night, and temperatures were now well below freezing. If someone were hurt or in trouble, there was no one and nothing else to help them but me. Still, I erred on the side of caution. I was still driving my car, though a bit more slowly, and as I approached the vehicle, I rolled down my passenger window a bit, shut my music off, and called out, "Hey, anyone there?" Are you okay?" I didn't hear a response. I worried that whoever this was passed out somewhere, but I wasn't about to get out and look for them. I told myself that I'd call out one last time, and if I didn't hear anything, I would leave, and the moment there was reception, I'd call it in. And if I did hear someone, well, I'd figure out my next course of action then. So again, I shout, "Hey, what happened? Are you all right?" There was silence for a beat, and then I heard rustling in the shadows of the trees, followed by a gruff voice saying,
"Yeah."
I was relieved at first, and was about to say something in response or possibly even stop my car and get out, when I noticed three things nearly simultaneously. As I inched my way past the front of the sedan, I noticed there was no damage to the hood or anywhere else on the car, which I found to be strange considering the blood on the inside of the door. In my rearview mirror, I caught a glance of someone coming out from behind the sedan, and they were making a beeline towards my car. Fast. The person didn't have any blood on them or appear to be injured in any way. They were wearing a mask. Not like a face mask for COVID or a ski mask or anything normal, but one of those masks you would see in the Purge movies. And they were holding something in their hand. I don't know what it was. I couldn't get a good look, but from its length and shape, my guess was maybe a tire iron or a crowbar, something in that vein. I don't need to tell you that I slammed on the gas the moment I noticed those things and drove like a bat straight out of hell, my heart thundering in my chest and my entire body shaking. My window was still rolled down, and in my haste, the music was still shut off, so I could very clearly hear someone, definitely a man, shouting at me, though I had no clue what they were saying. I just knew that I had to get out of there immediately. I stole one last look in my rearview mirror as I drove off, mostly to see if they were getting in the car to follow or if they had stopped. The man with the weapon was still standing in the middle of the road watching me, and right before I looked away from the mirror, I saw a second man emerge from the trees that had been rustling earlier, also wearing one of those creepy masks. I probably broke every law for speeding that night, but I wanted to get as far away from those men as possible. As soon as I made it to the roundabout, I turned towards town, parked in the Walmart parking lot that thankfully still had cars from who I assumed were workers closing up shop, and then I proceeded to have a full-on meltdown. When I could pull myself together, I called one of my friends who was a police officer to tell him what had happened and ask what I should do. He was concerned for me, and after asking if I was okay, where I was I followed. He told me since it was out of city limits, he couldn't do much on his end, but he could get in contact with the local police and sheriff's department, and they'd take my statement and go to check it out. I agreed, thanked him, and while I waited for police to show up, I called my boyfriend. Through my hysterical sobs and panic, I managed to tell him what had happened not even 10 or so minutes ago. He was, as you could imagine, super freaked for my safety and wanted me to either come home immediately or drive down himself to take me home. I told him the police were on their way to take my statement, so I couldn't leave and that I was fine, but I stayed on the phone with him until I saw the familiar blue and red lights in my rear view. I gave the police my statement, and they assured me that they would go back to the spot that I told them the sedan had been at, just to take a look and to see if those guys were still around. Though with no dash cam to catch the license plate and no description of the men, I wasn't really sure what they'd be able to do. All they had to go off of was a dark-colored car and two guys with masks. After I gave my statement, I went home and stayed curled up close to my boyfriend the entire night, listening to every sound the house made in fear that it would somehow be those guys arriving to finish whatever they had started. Since the incident, I haven't heard back from police about whether or not they have any leads, and I'm not sure they ever will. I'm just thankful that I'm still here and I didn't stop my car or get out. I'm not sure what would have become of me if I had. I still have so many questions that have no answers. What were they doing out there? Why? Was that blood on the inside of the car? Or just a ruse to get more attention? If it really was blood, had they hurt someone else? What would have happened to me if I had stopped my car? Needless to say, I won't be going on any more late night drives to nowhere. and I hope that I never cross paths with whoever those freaks were, ever again. This is hands down the wildest, most unsettling thing that's ever happened to me. It still doesn't feel entirely real, even though it's been almost a year. I've told a few close friends, and even they looked at me like, "Are you sure you didn't dream that?" But no, I lived it. And to this day, I have no idea how I didn't notice sooner. It started off small, stupid little things going missing in my apartment. Nothing dramatic. At first, it was a protein bar that I swore I'd left on the counter. Then it was one sock from a clean pair that I'd just folded. Another time, the volume on my TV was higher than I usually keep it, and I figured maybe I just sat on the remote. Like I said, minor stuff, easy to write off, and that's exactly what I did. Chalked it up to forgetfulness. I mean, I live alone, quiet neighborhood, middle of the suburbs. Not exactly the setting for some horror story. But then more stuff started to feel off. My TV would be left on a different input that I remembered. I always shut everything down the same way before bed. It's just my routine. So when I came home from work and saw it switch to HDMI 3 instead of HDMI 1, my brain did this weird little spin. It wasn't just the TV though. Sometimes my kitchen light would be left on when I swore that I'd turned it off. Or the bathroom mirror would have small streaks on it, like someone had wiped the fog off, even though I hadn't taken a hot shower that day. Still, I kept telling myself the same thing. You're tired. You probably forgot. It's nothing. But that's when the sounds came. My house is a bit older, so it's always had a bit of character. Creaky floorboards, pipes that groan when the heat kicks on, all of that. But I started hearing these dull, heavy bumps in the ceiling above my hallway. It wasn't like every night, just now and then. But usually when it was late, when everything else was quiet. I figured I might have raccoons or squirrels or something. Houses make noise, no big deal. But one night, I just couldn't ignore it anymore. I got home late from work, maybe close to midnight. I walked into my house like usual, tossed my keys into the bowl by the door, and headed to the kitchen for a snack. As I walked down the hallway, I glanced up toward the attic access panel. You know, the one with the little pull string attached to the ceiling. And just for a split second, I could have sworn that I saw movement behind the vent near it. There was a shadow, but I could tell that something had shifted. I stopped walking. I stared. I don't know what I was expecting, but I got nothing. Just silence. I must have stood there for a full minute, trying to convince myself that it was only my imagination. I told myself I was overtired. Maybe a car drove by outside and cast a weird shadow through the window. At that point, I forgot all about the snack. I forced myself to go to bed, but the idea dug in and it just refused to leave. So the next day, I ordered a motion-activated camera off of Amazon. Just one of those cheap little things you can hook up with an app on your phone. It didn't feel like paranoia. It felt more like I needed to prove to myself that I was just being weird. I set it up in the hallway and angled it right at the attic door. I even tested it with my phone to make sure it worked. Then I went on about my life. 2 nights later, I wake up to a phone notification. 2:17 a.m. Motion detected. My heart immediately started racing. I was lying in bed in the dark, staring at my screen, dreading what I was about to see. But I had to. I tapped the clip. At first, it was just my empty hallway. But that's when the attic panel swung open. A hand appeared, gripping the edge of the opening. Then a leg. Then a whole person, carefully climbing down the ladder, barefoot, moving slowly and deliberately, like they'd done this 100 times before. They touched the floor, looked around, and walked out of frame toward the kitchen. I stopped the video there. I was now frozen, because I knew for a fact that there was another person in my house. That clip was live, so they were still there, maybe 20 feet away from me, separated by a single door. I grabbed the closest thing I could find, some aluminum baseball bat that I kept near the bed for just-in-case situations. I then tiptoed to the door and locked myself in the room. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely dial 911. Cops showed up in under 10 minutes. I have a digital lock on my front door, and because I wasn't leaving my bedroom before they got here, I gave that code to the dispatcher, and the police were able to let themselves in. Once inside, that was when I felt safe enough to come out of my bedroom. I explained everything, and they did a sweep of the house. Of course, unexpectedly, they didn't find anything in the downstairs portion of my house. But when they checked the attic, that's when it all clicked. There was a whole setup up there. A rolled-out sleeping bag, a backpack filled with half-eaten snacks, a few water bottles, even some paperback books. Someone had definitely been living up there. And they found him too, trying to hide himself in the far-off corner of the attic itself. Apparently, this guy was a neighbor's adult son, someone that I didn't know personally, but had seen a couple of times through my time living here. Word was he'd struggled with drug use and mental health issues, and had been ultimately kicked out of his parents' house months earlier. Apparently, he broke into my house while I was away on vacation back in October, and just never left. He quietly lived up there, sneaking down only at night to eat, watch TV, whatever he really wanted actually. The reason the bathroom mirror looked used or why the kitchen light was on, that was all him, walking around while I was asleep. That night he got arrested, I moved out 3 weeks later. Even now, I can't fully wrap my head around it. The idea that I was living under the same roof as someone else, completely unknowingly, for months, still makes my skin crawl. What messes with me the most is how subtle it all was. He didn't steal anything major. He didn't make a mess. He was careful, strategic. I probably would never have known if I hadn't seen that shadow by the vent. That tiny, fleeting moment turned out to be the crack in the illusion that I needed in order to figure out what was really going on. I've developed this weird sensitivity to noise now. I used to love total silence at night, but ever since that happened, silence really freaks me out. I keep a white noise machine running, and I leave a light on in the hallway. I can't stand that creeping feeling of, what was that sound? Because now I know, it's not always just the house settling. People always ask why I didn't notice something sooner, and honestly, I don't know. I think we trust our spaces too much. We believe our homes are safe because they're ours. But now, I second guess everything. Every little sound, every flicker on the baby monitor. Yes, I have one now, and I don't even have a baby. I don't feel crazy. I just feel hyper-aware. Living alone used to feel like freedom. Now, it feels like something that I have to triple check. And this is still something that I think about every time I hear a bump in the ceiling. I'm going to start this off with a bit of a trigger warning. This story involves violence, drug use, and even a bit of animal abuse. So don't act like I didn't try to warn you. I've been needing to get this off my chest. What happened between October 2017 and early 2019. It's been sitting heavy with me for quite some time. A little backstory first though, just to give context. I graduated high school in 2016. At the time, I wasn't working. Not because I wasn't trying, but because nothing really panned out. I had a few interviews, but they didn't lead anywhere. Honestly, I was too anxious to apply even at the local supermarkets, since most of the people who bullied me in high school worked there. The idea of seeing them every day made me shut down. So instead of working, I just stuck close to the few friends that I had. I wasn't very social during school. I had a long-term girlfriend early on, and I put most of my energy into that relationship instead of building a friend group. When we broke up near graduation, I realized I didn't really have anyone left, except for one person. Sam. Sam had been my best friend all through school. He had a good job, a supportive family, money, and a decent group of friends. My parents liked him and thought that he was a good influence on me. He didn't drink or do drugs, and I really looked up to him. So when Sam asked me to move in with him, I didn't hesitate for an instant. He'd found a rental through a family friend at a small real estate agency. It was overpriced and run down, but we didn't know any better. Our parents were eager to have us out of the house. His family figured that he was doing well enough to live independently, and my stepdad was tired of supporting me while I wasn't working. We ended up moving in with one of Sam's childhood friends. We'll call this guy Blake. I'd never met Blake before, and he was hardly around the house because he worked a lot and spent most weekends dirt biking. Things were fine for a while, until the first major blow-up. One night, Blake got home at around 2:30 a.m. Ready to crash, he walked into his room to find two random teenagers hooking up on his bed. Sam had apparently let them stay there without telling Blake. Blake packed up and left the very next day. As far as I know, Sam and Blake never spoke again. Now, let's get into the real story, starting February of 2018. By this time, I'd finally gotten a job through my dad. I was enjoying the routine of working and being out of the house. But Sam had started acting off. He wasn't leaving for work before me like he used to. He was snappy all the time, moody, and he would leave the house at all hours without saying where he was going. Now, I'm nobody's parent. I'm not trying to watch over anyone, but it would still have been nice to know. Turns out, he was cheating on his girlfriend with a girl from our high school. It was around this time that when Sam was in a bad mood, he'd start making threats, like saying he'd throw all my stuff out on the street if I didn't do exactly what he asked. Clean the house, run errands, basically whatever he felt like. Now, I didn't own much, just a mattress and my desktop computer. He never actually followed through, but that was likely because I didn't ever really push back. I just kept my head down. But things started to get weirder. He started stealing my clothes, even though they didn't fit him, and he would hand me his shirts afterwards, like it was some sort of weird exchange program. It was like he needed to control even the littlest of things. He also stopped cooking, started living off of fast food, using a gas credit card that his dad had given him. So for months, it was 2 fast food meals a day, until his dad shut that down. After that, it was McDonald's and 2-liter bottles of iced coffee every night. At first, I figured whatever he was doing wasn't my business. But then he couldn't pay rent or bills and asked me to cover for him. When I refused, he'd guilt trip me or physically block my room. Now, I was already anxious from how angry and aggressive he'd become, so I gave in. A lot. And it started hurting me financially. Eventually, Sam stopped working altogether. He told me one day, work let me go early, and said they'd call if they needed me again. I told him that's not how jobs really work, and we argued about it. It took him 10 weeks to finally call his job back, only to learn that they'd marked him as having abandoned the position. Even after all of this, I still tried to support him the way that he had supported me during my rough patch, but instead of appreciating it, he'd lash out, yell at me, tell me that I had a problem with always being right in the most venomous of ways. With all his new free time, he started inviting that girl from high school over constantly. He told me to keep it a secret from his girlfriend, but I couldn't do that. I was close with her. Now, while I hardly ever saw that other girl myself, I did my best to avoid the house as much as possible. I later found out that she was at our house nearly every day, sometimes multiple times a day. That's when Sam started bringing the pets in. Sam's family gave him a bird. He went out and bought a dog named Sparta. Then he bought a kitten for that girl that he was cheating with. They named her Skittles. That kitten eventually ran away, so he bought another one and gave it the same name. But what he did to that kitten makes me sick to this day. When the girl or I weren't home, he'd lock the cat in the closet and only feed it when he remembered to. I tried to help, feeding her whenever he wasn't around, but he eventually noticed. One day, he actually caught me feeding the cat. That's when he slammed me into the wall and screamed that I was poisoning his animals. Then he hit me, hard, before walking off like nothing ever happened. Another day, I came home and the bird was gone. Sam wasn't home either. When I happened to ask him about it later, he told me that the bird had fallen over in its cage and broken its neck. That was the first real time that I felt panic. This wasn't just someone who was sad or struggling. Something was very clearly wrong. Later that night, Sam came home carrying a shoebox. I thought that he was finally going to bury the bird. But it wasn't the bird in the box. It was the kitten. According to Sam, she broke her neck jumping around in the closet. And I'll never forget the way that he said it. No sadness, no anger, just plain emptiness. His eyes were completely hollow. He walked back into his room and locked the door behind him. I didn't see him for nearly a week after that. Then came the final straw. I got home late one night after working overtime. Sam thought I was out for the night. I walked in to find him and the girl from high school doing coke in our living room. I didn't say a word. I couldn't. But by then, Sam was unrecognizable. Over the past 6 months, he had screamed at me, stolen from me, physically assaulted me, and made me feel like everything that went wrong, including the deaths of his bird and cat, were somehow my fault. That night, I heard him bragging, lying, making fun of me, using every piece of high school nostalgia in order to impress this girl. Well, the next day, I told Sam's girlfriend everything. I took Sparta, the dog, because he was clearly malnourished and abused, even though I'd been feeding him in secret. I contacted the SPCA, sent them photos of the house, and reported the abuse. I timed everything with a scheduled house inspection so someone else would be there just in case Sam lost it. I thought it was a solid plan. That day, I was actually busy with everything when I saw a car pull up in front of the house. I immediately thought that it was our landlord, so that was my cue to get things rolling. I'd learned very quickly after this that that wasn't our landlord at all. I went to grab my phone from the room because I had already had my claims typed out, and all I had to do was hit send. Follow that up with the case manager I was assigned, and the ball would be in motion. But as I walked out of the room and into the hallway, I came face to face with Sam, shirtless, reeking of weed and alcohol. He slammed me against the wall with one hand, holding a long kitchen knife in the other. He screamed. I shook. I couldn't get words out. When I told him where I'd taken Sparta, he screamed at me, wanting to know where his dog was. I shook. I couldn't get words out. When I told him where I'd taken Sparta, he choked me and ran the flat side of the knife down my arm. Everything started to go blurry, like I was beginning to black out. And it kept getting more intense. He was screaming that I betrayed him, that it was my fault his girlfriend had dumped him. He then pressed the knife near my neck, and at that moment, I thought I was going to die. I whispered, "My friends can hear you." See, I always left Discord open on my desktop in my room, and he knew that. He hesitated, but then let go. I ran straight to my car, didn't look back once. I spent a few days at my parents' place after, sleeping on the couch, too scared to explain anything. They called me Jumpy. I told them I just missed them. Sam messaged me asking to talk. I obliged. We met in public. He said that he was moving back in with his parents because he couldn't support himself anymore, and the house had too many bad memories for him. That was August 2018. I haven't seen him since. Once I told mutual friends what had happened, along with the girl that he'd been seeing, people from our old school cut ties with him completely. I filed a police report. I didn't press charges, but I told them I never wanted to see the guy again. I was told restraining orders cost money, and that wasn't something that I could afford at the time. But at least our last incident was documented. After he left, I moved back into the house on my own. He left everything, furniture, bedding, all of it, except for his PS4, headphones, and TV. I was now living alone in the house where my best friend had nearly killed me. I stopped talking to my friends. I started having nightmares. The aftermath from late 2018 through early 2019 was just as dark, maybe darker. The isolation, the guilt over the animals, the trauma of everything I'd seen, that all stayed with me. I still have photos of the house and of Sparta. I can post them here if people ever doubt what actually happened. In late 2019, I met my current girlfriend, and she's incredible. We just bought a house together and are moving in 2 weeks. Right now, we're both staying with my parents, but the move has brought back all of these memories. I haven't seen Sam in more than 6 years now, but I'm still scared of him. Still cautious. Although telling the story feels like a step forward. Like I'm finally closing that chapter of my life, on that house, and everything that happened inside of it.